Hi, everybody. I am Jeannie Rogers. I am the project manager and marketing lead with Secure Ideas, and I'm here to introduce our speaker for today, as well as what he's talking about. You guys are going to be watching using Burp Suite passively within your SDLC, and the person who is going to be speaking is our very own Mick Gillam. He's one of our senior security consultants at Secure Ideas, and I'll let him take it away. Go for it, Mick.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me. I know it's kind of a different kind of time right now, and so everyone's a little out of sorts. People are at home. People have kids running around while they're trying to work in some cases, and there's all, it's a different kind of time in general. And I'm glad to be able to kind of bring everyone together for a little bit here and talk about some cool stuff. So using Burp Suite passively within your SDLC. So what are we talking about here? Specifically, let's focus in on that word passively for a second and talk about what do I mean by that. What I'm talking about there is using Burp Suite's passive auditing or passive scanning facilities, which they analyze traffic. So you're feeding your web traffic through the Burp proxy, and it's just analyzing what you're giving it and trying to determine if there are security issues based on that. So you're not, feeding specific payloads. It's not going out and scanning and spidering. It's not doing any kind of malicious traffic. You're using your browser normally the way you normally do, and its passive facilities are just analyzing the traffic that you're feeding it. So I mean, why do you want to do that? It's kind of the first big question, right? Well, it's a way for identifying flaws early. There's this whole the common kind of buzz phrase these days is push left. The earlier you catch a bug, and this applies not just to security bugs, but any kind of code defect, the earlier you catch it in the software development lifecycle, the cheaper it is to fix. So that's simple. In the case of kind of an agile method where you're in constant iterations, the earlier in the iteration it's caught, the better as well. So checking for flaws regularly, check often, right? Being able to iteratively test your applications, being able to see what's going on, what's changed in the last sprint, you're testing it again, or maybe you do a monthly release, checking it every month in a way that's actually manageable. The passive tool set in particular, what we're aiming at here are QA people, developers primarily. So people that are not experts in application security at all. And so we're giving them some abilities without having to spend a lot of time or effort on training. There will be ideally some, but it should be fairly minimal. And the big one there, minimizing any increase to the workload, especially you're looking at QA. They're already in the application, going around, throwing bad input into fields, testing stuff usually at the UI level. So all you're doing by using Burp's passive facilities is proxying that traffic that they're already generating through Burp so that Burp can take a look at it and see what it sees. Now, there are drawbacks to this approach. It's a significantly limited subset of vulnerabilities. There are a whole bunch of types of vulnerabilities there is just no chance of detecting this way. If you're not trying injection payloads, you're not going to detect injection, for example. There's really nothing you can do on passive side to fix that. Now, we're not really dealing with the active scanner today. That's sort of out of the scope of this talk. But it has some ability to try that sort of stuff. That's maybe a next step. For now, let's focus on the passive. While they have a high confidence, they often misprioritize. What I mean by that is it's easy for it to say there is nothing here to prevent framing of the web application. So being contained in an iframe on another origin, for example, because the controls that can do that are headers, and it can tell for certain that those headers are not present. But for it to jump from this header is missing to clickjacking is possible would be incorrect, because clickjacking it's an uncommon and it's highly circumstantial, and any automated tool really, whether it's this, whether you're using active scanning, whether you're doing static analysis, they're not good at context. That's where it really has to be the human element. So in this case, it might go, this page is frameable, it may be susceptible to clickjacking, and it might call it a high because of that. And in reality, you look at it, and it is quite likely that I would look at that and call it a low, because clickjacking is not possible, and I can tell that it's not possible. Not having the header is a little loosey-goosey with the general security posture, but it's not an exploitable flaw in that state. On the back of that, this can lead to more questions than answers when you're starting out. So you got a developer or a QA person that is unfamiliar with clickjacking, going back to using that same example. They might see this come up and not know. And so there may be questions, if you've got QA doing the burp passive stuff, there may be questions that they need to ask the developers. If the developers are not familiar with clickjacking, they may not have those answers. It's entirely possible that the security team needs to get involved. If you have application security engineers on staff, I would expect they would have the expertise to answer those as well. And finally, the Burp Suite Pro license cost. I'm calling it a drawback because it is a cost. This is not an ad for Burp Suite. We use it every day. They don't sponsor us. But if I remember correctly, the current license cost for one license, one seat for Burp Suite Pro is like $400. So if you're privately paying it out of your own bank account right now, that may be, not ideal. Most companies, they're not going to have too big an issue with getting a Burp Pro license or a few Burp Pro licenses. For a large operation, obviously that could add up, and maybe you're looking at enterprise licensing there. I'm not sure. Okay, why Burp Pro? Because it has a community version. One thing I just want to kind of quickly address. Some of the extensions, when we start looking at extensions, are Pro only. So they won't work on the free version. Also, it's worth noting there's OWASP Zap out there. It's free, open source, has a similar feature set to Burp Suite. That's not the tool I'm talking about today because it's not where my expertise is. It's not what we use in our day-to-day as application penetration testers. But it is a capable tool. It is possible that this same sort of thing could be done with that tool. It's just not within the scope of this talk. So, does it replace static analysis? That's a no. So there's some overlap in terms of what it could detect, and I called it static analysis, but really I'm talking about both static analysis and dynamic analysis, SAST and DAST. There is some overlap in terms of what they're going to detect. It is entirely likely that Burp's passive auditing will find some of the same flaws as static analysis, dynamic analysis, especially dynamic analysis. But their strengths are in different areas. Both aren't good at context. We talked about that. But a lot of the stuff that will come up with the Burp passive stuff, it's configuration type stuff. Some of that's going to be specific to the actual deployment, to the tester or QA environment, or prod if you want to do it on prod. There's really no harm in doing that with the passive approach. Some of that will be application level stuff, right? If the application is setting a cookie and it is not using HTTP only or the secure flags, or offhand, I'm not sure if Burp is picking it up already, but the same site cookie flag is something that we should be looking for at this point as well. If it's not already doing it in Burp, I'm sure that's something that they will add. So they're usually pretty quick on that sort of thing. Yeah, so there's some overlap between what you'll get with static and dynamic analysis and what you'll get with the passive scanner, but it's not really this. They don't have the same strengths. All of the server side third-party dependencies, your static analysis will pick up vulnerabilities in those. Burp passive has no visibility into that. On the other hand, anything related to the actual runtime environment, static analysis is at a disadvantage for. Does it replace application security engineers? The answer is, again, a no. Most of the defects that it will find are things that a good AppSec engineer should be able to help you avoid. But first of all, a lot of people don't have dedicated application security engineers on staff, or if they do, they're very few of them and they're overwhelmed. But even if they are there, they're not always going to catch everything. And what you'll catch with the Burp passive stuff is a lot of low-hanging fruit that you're better off catching before it lands on your application security engineer's desk. It's just easier that way. Effectively lower cost. Certainly, we talked about how it could generate questions, how priorities could be hard to figure out, and if you've got application security engineers, you're going to want to lean on them for that, especially early on if you start out this sort of process. But yeah. Penetration testers, so, which is really a way of saying, am I putting myself out of work here? No. So I do a lot of stuff when I'm testing an application that is active, it is hands-on, it is me manually playing with the interface, it's me manipulating the traffic and trying different things against the server. That comes from, at this point, about 15 years professionally of writing applications. I know application infrastructure inside out. I recognize every single HTTP header that I see normally. That is standard. I can recognize different auth types. I can take apart a token that's a JWT and actually analyze it and look for flaws. There's a whole lot that I can do that this is not going to enable someone to do. As a penetration tester, I'm using Burp. I'm using, like, the passive scanner is running when I do a penetration test against an application. So I'm going to catch everything that this process would catch, but I'm also expensive, right? You're not going to have me penetration test your app every 2 weeks or every month, or probably for most companies any more often than once a quarter at the absolute most. But for a lot of companies, it's once a year. So from that standpoint, being able to do some stuff in-house and get it before it lands on my desk is better. Again, cheaper to fix, more secure. How about a bug bounty program? No. So again, this does not replace that. This has a much lower financial cost and administrative effort than a bug bounty program. It is going to catch fewer kinds of bugs than a bug bounty program. You certainly don't want to start a bug bounty program and then have a bunch of the stuff that the passive scan is going to find anyway come up and be reported. You'll end up paying out a whole pile of small bounties for silly stuff that you could have caught. So from that standpoint, yeah. But running a good bug bounty program is a significant effort and overhead. It's why there are third parties that do it reasonably well that are around. Anyway, so that's that. Let's get out of the boring stuff now. Just kind of talky stuff. Move on to demo time. Hopefully this all goes smoothly, but you never know with live demos, so let's see how it goes. So pop out there. I have a nifty little pen testing VM set up. I have in my pen testing VM, I have Burp Suite already installed, Burp Suite Pro. So let's ignore this in the background. This is going to be our test application, but we'll come back to that. So I started Burp Suite. You can see I have the dark theme on. I meant to switch that to a light theme before this presentation, but I didn't. So here we are. So I created a temporary project in the opening wizard. I'm just going to use the defaults because you don't have my custom configuration file. There's nothing in there that's really relevant to this discussion anyway. And I'm going to walk through kind of the whole end-to-end process for setting this up. That's just me accessing my notes to make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, so Burp Suite's open. If you've never launched Burp before, then you are going to have the it's not there, proxy intercept is going to be on for you if you've never launched it before. If you're a first timer, you want to switch that off. In my case, I've got it set to off by default in my user settings. So there's that. Now we want to look at the proxy interface. So proxy tab, options, and you can see the listeners here. This is important. Check that this checkbox is checked, this running checkbox. Because if your running checkbox is not checked, your interface isn't listening. Typically, this happens when you have something already using that port when you launch Burp Suite. And Burp isn't going to keep retrying that. It's just not going to have a listener running. So it'll look like this, empty checkbox. You want to make sure that's listening. The reason I point that out is because it has at times in the past been missed. So proxy listeners listening. What I like to do, whether you use Firefox or Chrome, is I use Foxy Proxy Standard. It's a free extension. It's in either your Chrome Web Store or your whatever they call it for Firefox, the Firefox extension distribution place. So you want to install that. In this case, I already have it here. Just an odd chance I have problems with my demo. So install that. You'll get a little Fox icon up in the corner. There you go, up there. And I'm going to open that up and go to options. So that was options right here on the bottom of the menu. And in this case, I already did it, but I'll do it again. So make that a little bigger. Add a new proxy. Manual proxy configuration is good. I'm assuming you're running the browser and Burp Suite on the same box because that's what pretty much everybody does. There you go. So my local host IP, port 8080, matching what was listed here under the interface in Burp. Right. Everything else, the defaults are fine, SOX v5, whatnot. Yeah. Down here, there's a save button. I can also call it something, like Burp Suite. I can pick a color for it. I'm going to make it green because I think I already had I may have already had a blue one there. I don't know. There we go. Green. There we go. So save, and I've got an entry in there. Burp Suite 127.0.0.1, port 8080. And the color is green. The color is not really important other than I would not choose orange. And the reason being, orange is much more difficult to distinguish from the normal Foxy proxy icon. You notice when I select that proxy, it changes to that color. It's not going to select it for you, so once you've added the proxy, you want to select it. And you're looking at the list in here. There's a disable Foxy proxy there as well. Yeah, on, off, and that's why we're using the extension. It makes it really easy to toggle it on and off. For your QA people or developers that are using this for testing, they really need to dedicate a browser to it. So I would say if they normally use Chrome for everything else, it's a great idea to use Firefox for the application they're testing, or vice versa. It doesn't matter which way. But having a separate dedicated browser, the other way to do it is through profiles in the browser. So we look under here, there's an open guest one, there's a manage people. And you can see I'm not logged into my account here, so it's a little bit different from probably what you would see if you're a regular daily user of it. But you can add a separate person here, which puts them in the dropdown. Yep. And you notice it's a separate window. It doesn't have the extensions. So the extensions are they're I guess sandbox limited to the one specific profile. So having a separate test profile is another way to do it. Rather than using two different browsers, they can use two different profiles in the same browser. And Firefox has similar kind of profile functionality as well. So there we go. Now we should be proxying. Should be, if it worked. So right now I have this Juice Shop app up. This it's a intentionally vulnerable web application. It's an OWASP project. It's free and open source. We use it for training. We are not, I believe we technically have done a couple of pull requests on it, but we are not main contributors to this particular project, although we use it in the Samurai WTF project that several secure ideas people maintain. Okay, so I'm here, I'm in the browser. I'm going to refresh on that. Just I already had it open. Refresh. If it's working, it's not. If it was working, I should see the HTTP history there. Do that one more time. There we go. We got some Cloudflare stuff coming through. Something popped up on the target window. It's weird about localhost stuff. That's right. We might be pointing this somewhere else in a second here. So bear with me a second here. So yeah, we'll change that over to secureideas.com. make it easier. It's easier to see that it's working. There we go. Secure ideas. So you can see the secure ideas stuff is coming in. You can see third-party resources are coming in. I would add it to my scope if I was doing the test. And it's getting a little ahead of me here. So as soon as I add something to the scope, it says you've added an item to the target scope. Do you want to stop sending out of scope items to the history or other burp tools? So to avoid accumulating extra state in the browser, or from the browser, extra stuff, extra requests that are other things going out of scope, I generally say no to that. And the reason why is because I will miss if the application is using any other kind of third-party APIs or content delivery networks. They would then be not captured in the proxy history. So rather than do that, I tend to just dedicate this browser to the testing and let it capture everything. I'll still limit the scope to the one thing, but let it capture everything. Now, what you're seeing here, these issues that it's populated on the side here, this is that passive stuff that sort of passive stuff that it can detect. So content sniffing is not disabled. A bunch of this is coming from extensions that I've added into this, and we'll go over those a bit later. If it sets cookies, it will tell me about cookie issues. If they're missing headers, it will tell me about those, mostly thanks to the extensions, but Burp has some built-in checking for that as well. A bunch of these are marked as informational items down here. So informational, probably not a thing to worry about. Yeah. So all that kind of stuff is in there. Before I continue down that road, I want to address a important thing. It is likely that if you have a dev environment or a QA environment, and you're following best practices, it is likely that you have TLS on. And if you have TLS on, then this is not going to work just yet for you. So you need to do a cert trust for it. So Burp, every instance of Burp, when it is first loaded, first installed, and you launch it that first time, it generates a CA, a certificate of authority, which it uses because it's unpacking the HTTPS traffic and then examining it, capturing it in Burp, and then packing it back up and passing it to the browser. And it can't sign that traffic again. It can't use the original certificate, the trusted certificate from secureideas.com. It uses its generated CA to do that. That's going to cause cert errors in the browser. So here we go. I'm going to mess it up. I'm going to mess it up on purpose. I'm going to regenerate the certificate, get us into that fail state. Here we go, and go. I somehow didn't actually break it. It seems to still be either caching or using a trusted CA. Regardless, we'll go through the process anyway so that you have it. So what I want to do is export the certificate in a dir format. So that was right under those proxy listeners. There was this import export CA cert. Let's do it. So we'll do that. Select a file. You can see it here where I've done it before. So we'll do that. And I'm going to overwrite mine. In your case, it'll be a new one. It's easier if you have that dir extension. And then over here in Chrome, I'm going to actually go to the settings. On privacy and security, scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. Did I go past it? I did. There's a manage certificates here. And what you want to do is switch to the authorities tab, import that dir file that you exported. You may need to change the drop down to get it. And I have another, nope, was I there? I was there. There it is. I have it there, open it. Trust the certificate for identifying websites is the important one. You could check all three if you want, it's up to you. In my case, I got an import error because it already existed. In your case, it should work. Once it's in your trust, then you will be able to proxy that TLS encrypted traffic without getting a bunch of cert errors, like I wasn't able to produce for you. So that was one of the first steps you're going to do. You only really have to do it once per burp install, unless you regenerate the cert. That should have caused it to fail. For whatever reason, it didn't. So yeah, if you have to regenerate the cert, you may also need to delete and re-import the cert into your trust store. This seems like a good time for a quick aside as well about Internet Explorer, because Internet Explorer doesn't have Foxy proxy. Internet Explorer doesn't have any proxy settings actually normally in it that will work for you to proxy through Burp. It also doesn't have its own cert trust store in it. So if you have to proxy through Internet Explorer, the normal way to do it for us, and my colleague Oshan has written some blog content about it as well. You have to use the system proxy and the system cert trust, whatever it's called in Windows, Certificate Manager or something like that. That's your only option. In his case, he uses a Windows VM, and that's what he talked about, so that he's not proxying the entire system through Burp. And there is a third-party tool, and I'm off the top of my head, I can't remember how much he dug into using it. There's an open source one. There's also a commercial proprietary one. The proprietary one's called Proxifier. It's the one I've had better luck with. Anyway, it's a tool for targeting an individual process in Windows and proxying it. And I've used it for testing Windows applications and for testing specifically in Internet Explorer before. But if you don't absolutely need to use Internet Explorer, it's much easier to not. The exception to that is the new release of Edge, which is built on Chromium and has pretty much all the same menus and stuff in it, if I recall correctly. Okay, so we can proxy our HTTPS traffic here. We've got Foxy proxy set up. We're doing that. Here we are. We're capturing traffic here. If there's any polling and stuff, it can actually make a whole lot of noise here. So can analytics. There's not a lot you can do about that. Let's touch on the extensions a bit. So I have Retire.js installed. Definitely recommend that as a passive one. I've actually, the checked ones, the loaded ones are only, those ones are the passive ones. Those ones are the ones that are applicable to what we're doing here. So Retire.js looks at JavaScript libraries. So jQuery, Angular, React, Bootstrap, that sort of stuff. And particularly, it flags if you have old versions of JavaScript on them with CVEs in particular. So, and it will tell you, it will, I'm going to switch back over to that target tab here. It will have an entry up here for your vulnerable JavaScript library. It will have a request and response for the actual request that fetched it. And it will, in here under the issue description, it will actually have something similar to this, pointing to the details on the particular vulnerabilities that are in play. So Retire.js, I definitely recommend. I tend to be pretty hard on people on tests if they've got really old kind of unpatched JavaScript libraries, especially if it's on an application that's either much newer than the version of the library, or if it's something that is simple, if it's something where the project team has done a really good job, like the jQuery team has done a really good job with documenting the breaking changes and providing shims to help upgrade. And so jQuery, the 1. and 2. major versions have been end of life for like 2 years now. So if I were to test your application and I saw jQuery 1. or 2. I would certainly point that out. There are a number of known flaws in them. A lot of them are not individually too terrible. Some of them are. There have been cross-site scripting flaws. There are certainly some that make cross-site scripting easier, but that'll be reflected up here in the issues if you've got Retire.js and you run across them. A lot of times you'll end up with high and critical issues because that is the level of the CVE on the JavaScript library. That kind of ties into what I was talking about with it kind of misprioritizing. It tends to skew high on issues where it is unable to tell if you're vulnerable. And so that's the sort of case where you kind of want to engage the developer team, read the issue on it, find out if you're even using the piece of functionality in the library that would make you vulnerable, because in a lot of cases you may not be. That sort of thing. And that's where I'm saying a lot of investigation could come out of this. If I'm the QA person and I find something like that in there, probably I'm just getting this issue detail here and opening a ticket. Because I'm not, assuming it's not a highly technical QA team, I'm not in a position to determine whether this is correct or not. That sort of thing is going to be a follow-up with the developers and probably with the security team. So, yeah. Got that. Let's move on to another kind of extension here. So the ones that are unchecked are also cool, but they're active. SRI check is in there. That one does a check for the sub-resource integrity attribute on resources coming from third-party CDNs or basically cross-origin. So if you're loading JavaScript libraries from code.jquery.com, their CDN, it will check to see that you have the integrity attribute on it with a hash in it. It is a plain kind of simple check, but it's a really good thing to have, and it's something that isn't going to break anything for you normally. For it to break stuff, you would have to have the CDN modifying that library without telling you. So the case that it handles is that CDN gets corrupted. Somebody compromises the CDN, replaces good jQuery with bad jQuery that's got evil cross-site scripting stuff in there. And in your case, if you caught those issues, if you added those integrity hashes, which, by the way, for jQuery, if you copied and pasted the CDN script tag from their website, it has it already. But yeah, if this issue was caught during testing, during QA, and corrected, you would have those integrity hashes, and your page would stop loading when it didn't match the hash anymore, when that script didn't match the hash. So that evil jQuery version would never execute on your site. Your page would probably break if you were relying on jQuery. But whatever nastiness they were trying to do wouldn't happen. So that one's good for that. There's an additional scanner checks is here as well. That is mainly HTTP headers that one looks at. So what I got there, this stuff, content sniffing, specifically with relation to the content type options, no sniff. What was the other one? There was another one up there. Cross-site scripting, filter misconfiguration. And so they explain themselves. I believe it had, just from skimming it here, I don't see it actually referring to the the XSS protection header, but I believe that's what it's referring to. That sort of stuff. It's again, it's tightening up your security posture, addressing issues that overall weaken the security posture of the application. Is this going to be a command injection flaw? No, it's not. But that content sniffing one, for example, that potentially could be the difference between someone getting cross-site scripting and someone not getting cross-site scripting if users are normally able to author some sort of content on the page, or rather author pages, essentially, author documents, individual resources that can be referenced by a URI. So it's, again, circumstantial, could lead to more questions than answered, but it's something that you can probably address without causing any problems at all for your application. In most cases, it is unlikely that the behavior that disables is something that you are relying on. If you are, you have a very old legacy app, more than likely that is badly architected in the first place. So yeah, I've been involved in my share of those, but they've become increasingly rare. So yep, those. We had one more extension over here, the CSP auditor. And this is only going to help you if you're already using a content security policy. The CSP auditor looks at your content security policy's rules, the directives, and looks for flaws that can be used to get cross-site scripting despite your CSP. A simple example is the JSDeliver.net content delivery network. If you're allowing that particular content delivery network as a script source, then somebody can use that to get script execution. And the reason why is because a specially crafted URL for that, and is by design, a specially crafted JSDeliver.net URL can be pointed at arbitrary GitHub files, arbitrary files in GitHub.com.net. That's not it. So that's fine. CSP auditors, if you have a content security policy, it's good for that, and especially because the content security policy on an application that is under active development is likely to change periodically. And when somebody adds a new directive into it, it would be good to catch if that is a directive that caused a problem with the CSP's effectiveness. You catch that early, it's likely that they can slightly modify whatever piece of code they're trying to push. Use a different content delivery network if it's a content delivery network, or potentially change how they're doing something, change how they're accessing an API, change how they've written some piece of JavaScript so it's not dependent on unsafe eval, that sort of thing. In some cases, maybe it's because they added a library and the library made them put on unsafe eval on script, and you didn't have to until you added that library. Maybe that's a reason to rethink that library. If there's not a whole lot of work built on that yet, it's a great time to catch it and do that. So CSP auditor is good for that. Those four, so SRI check, additional scanner, CSP auditor, retire.js are the ones I would definitely recommend, just because they're all additional rules that just plug right into the passive scanner and flag more stuff. And it's all easily observable stuff. Notice 2 of the 4 are Python. And so in Burp, which is a Java application, what that means, so first of all, if I were looking to install them, I would find them by those names here in this list in the BAP store. Then moving on, I have to do this. So you have to set the Python environment for those extensions to work, and actually before it even allows you to install them from here. I don't know if any of these are Ruby based because I don't have the Ruby configured. That would show you, but yeah. In any case, you'll end up having to go over to options. I prefer to use the the Jython standalone jar for it. So I just download that and point to it. It's just a matter of downloading that jar from the official source. If you do a Google search for Jython standalone jar, it'll actually take you to clearly the official site for it. You can download it, and you can select it through here, point burp at it. In this case, it's in my downloads folder because I never moved it out of there. There it is. Just open that. Once it's there, I can go and install whichever extensions in here are specifically Python based, so require Jython. So just in case anyone's madly scrambling down notes, I've got a recap slide we're getting to that lists those, and it lists kind of the other steps that we went through throughout this. And that's really, from a setup standpoint, that's really the bulk of it. At this point, I can navigate around the site, and as that generates traffic, that will automatically populate here under the target tab. It'll update these issues with new items as we come across them, and it will add additional issues. Because it's passive and we're not generating any malicious traffic, there's no inherent risk in doing it. It's within the realm of stuff. If you've been around security as very, very long, if you've talked to Kevin or seen him speak, or we've ever taught a class with you, permission is a big deal, right? If you're hacking something without permission, that is illegal. So we make a big deal out of it. This passive observation type stuff is within the realm of stuff that I would say is pretty universally considered to be okay without having to go and get permission, because you're not manipulating traffic. You are doing exactly what the browser normally does. You're just looking at it. That's all Burp is doing, is looking at the normal traffic going back and forth for things that indicate security problems. So no, I'm not saying you should crawl all over the internet looking for security problems in Burp, but you don't have to worry about breaking stuff if you go in and take a little stroll through your production environment, through your production website. You're not going to break anything. You go through. We can fill out a contact form, that sort of thing. No problem. So that's pretty much it for kind of a live demo. If I'm a developer or QA person, then the application that I want in here in the browser that is being proxied is the application I'm testing. And I go and I do my normal thing. I just test it the way I already test it. But then I go and look under the issues, see what I have in here, grab the details, open tickets, just start the discussion with the developers. You'll find that after kind of a few iterations of that process, there are going to be issues that are there that you don't report anymore because you've decided they are irrelevant. You've decided they don't need to be fixed because they don't actually have a security impact. That's okay. That's to be expected. Yeah. So let's switch back over to the PowerPoint. There we go. And so here's the recap I promised. So first of all, I'm using Burp Pro, and some of those extensions require the Pro license. So if you want to do all this, you got to get the Pro version. You could probably get partway there with the community version. Some of the extensions, I believe, do not require Pro. I know that's true in general. I don't know of these extensions if for certain if some of them don't require Pro. Add Foxy Proxy standard edition into the browser you want to use. You may want to create a profile or dedicate a browser to it that is different from the browser you use for example, if you're using a SaaS product as your ticket system using a hosted Jira instance. You don't want to proxy Jira through Burp. Just make a bunch of noise for no reason. The CA trust. So getting your Burp certificate and then adding it to the trust in the browser. We did that. If I went through that too fast, you need to check how to do it again. That's something that Portswigger makes Burp. It has they've got a good help article for that. It's easy to find, well indexed. The extensions I recommended were these four here: Retire.js, SRI check, additional scanner checks, CSP auditor. That's for passive use. There are definitely other ones I would recommend that provide great value for actual testing. But for this particular use case, we're targeting those are the four. Some of them require, half of them it turns out require the Jython standalone jar, so you need to download that. And then under the Burp extender in the options, you need to point to that jar. And then expect conversations to come out of it, especially early on. It is likely that nearly every ticket that QA opens is going to result in a conversation. It really is. Of some kind, between either dev talking about it internally or somebody investigating it and trying to determine what it means or whether it's as bad as it sounds, or readjusting the risk level or the general kind of urgency on it. Any of that sort of thing is fairly likely to happen early on. For our part, pardon me. For our part, we can certainly help with that. If particularly speaking on the application security expertise side, we do this routinely. I spend somewhere very close to 250 days a year doing application penetration tests, or activities directly related to them. So it is likely that you could have a whole conversation about something that I've seen so many times that I know exactly what it means. So we have, and this isn't going to turn into a long sales pitch, but we do have strategic advisory services that I think are a great program. They basically, they're priced fairly low. They get us on Slack, on webinars, on calls, whenever you need us. So we end up being an extra person on your team, basically. And so I think that's our best way to help if you don't have enough expertise, specifically in application security in-house, as you're dealing with those issues. So that's it. That's kind of where we end. Pardon me. We got contact information up there. I can certainly stick around and take questions for a few minutes. I can also pick them up on email, so you can get me directly, or info@securideas.com goes out to it's our general kind of contact list.
Looks like there is a question in the chat, Mick. Actually, two questions from Daniel South. He said, thanks for the presentation. He has two questions. What is the most valuable issue, high signal, high impact, you typically see from passive scanning? And I can let you answer that first, and then I'll ask the second question.
Sure. So cookie flags is kind of a big one, although it doesn't seem like a huge issue. Actually, cookie scope issues can be as well. So if you've got a cookie scope to a whole domain, and you've got, say, within the scope of that cookie, you've got your bad old legacy system you know is bad. You're hoping to retire it soon, but it's not there yet. You got your new system, that sort of stuff. Your new system is under a different path, and that cookie is available to both, and used by, especially if it's the cookie used by the nice new app where most people have been migrated to, but your old system exposes risk of that being stolen. That's a bad one. So secure flags, an obvious easy one. HTTP only flag on session cookies can be an obvious kind of easy one. A lot of those kind of JavaScript issues, some of those there are some pretty bad CVEs on JavaScript libraries that you may actually be exposed to. So that's definitely way up there as well. And a lot of it is just tightening up kind of things, tightening things up, making things a little better, a little lower tolerance. I often draw the kind of parallel between tolerances you don't want in your application, just like tolerances you don't want in a physical lock. And this is definitely gonna hit home with Jeannie here, because that's kind of her realm. So you have a lock, physical lock. The more wiggle room there is, the easier it is to pick. On the flip side, if it was so precisely machined that there was no wiggle room at all, then as soon as you had wear and tear on the lock or the key, they wouldn't work together anymore. So there are a lot of cases where you have to have some tolerance, but having too much, even if it doesn't seem to lead to a security issue now, it's likely a piece that could be part of a larger security issue down the road.
That was a really good example. You want the second question?
Yeah, so leveraging QA and dev folks.
Yes.
I would say, so Burp they've got some automated tooling specifically tied into their enterprise edition. We tried it for a bit with Portswigger. We do have although I said they're not a partnership, we do, sorry, I said they're not a sponsor. We do have sort of a relationship with them. They provide student licenses when we teach classes for free, basically, for example. So we were able to try out the enterprise edition for a bit. And at the time, for us, it didn't make sense for what we were doing. For internal use in your organization, it can help. It's not a bad thing. If you want to do it automated, that's definitely geared more in that direction. What I'm talking about here with leveraging QA or dev is really just don't train them completely in depth on the ins and outs of Burp and every little detail of HTTP traffic and how to do specific kind of active testing, at least not to start, unless you have a team that is already kind of most of the way there. For that kind of group, it's basically, if you can get them set up with the tool and just have them do their workflow the way they normally do and scrape the issues and kind of leave it at that. The training to do that is probably, we could certainly do a full day class to do that, but I bet for a lot of organizations a half day would be appropriate. I don't know if I addressed that one very well.
He said thanks.
Right.
Anybody else have any more questions for us that we can answer for you? And obviously, if you can't think of anything right now, we will be posting this video on our YouTube at a later date, so you can rewatch it. And if you think of any questions, you are more than welcome to email us anytime. And thanks again, Mick, for speaking to everyone and taking time out of your day to do this.
Great. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys. Have a wonderful day.